Welcome back to Admitted, Advice on College Admissions and Testing. I'm very excited about our panel discussion surrounding the interpretation of scores on the digital SAT or the DSAT, and the discussions we might be having with families and students about what do these scores even mean. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to our panel from our test prep pros. We have Jessica from Tutor Doctor of North Jersey. We have Byron from Tutor Doctor of Albuquerque. We have Chris from Tutor Doctor of San Diego. And then I'm your host, Jeff Day from Tutor Doctor of Morris County, New Jersey. So thanks for joining today. And we'll get started. Far too often, when students take the SAT, whether the traditional pencil and paper of the old or the new DSAT format, the focus is solely on the final test score. Although incredibly important, the final test score that is submitted to colleges and universities is just a small piece of what goes into the preparation of the test. As education professionals that have been watching the evolution of the SAT and the ways in which we help families prepare for that SAT, we have years of experience and data that have molded our thoughts on the subject. So let's take time today to organize our discussion into three kind of steps. There's a lot of data, right? So we'll talk about data. What do we do with it and how can we interpret it? Then what information do we gain from that data and what discussions can be had using that information? We know, and then finally putting what we know and then finally putting everything together from the data and the information into something actionable. So, i.e., a plan of attack using that actionable data and in our discussions with parents. So let's start with the new DSAT score report. There's a ton of data in there. So how can we help decode those numbers and aid in the planning of our next move with the families and the students? So essentially, test scores, they're meaningless unless we have a plan. So first question, right? And Jess, I'm going to go to you with this as our female and ladies first. So Jess, what does it even mean that the new DSAT is an adaptive test? Parents should understand it isn't the same test that they took back when they were in high school. So what does that even mean for us?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. This is a really, really important question because it's one of the biggest changes on the SAT. And parents and students sometimes don't even know what it means. What it means is the better you do, the harder it gets. So typically, the SAT right now has two sections, reading, writing. So depending on, in the first 20 so questions, depending on the percentage that the student gets right, the test automatically moves them into an easy section or a harder module. They're calling them modules. So, and that's what adaptive really means. It means, and similar to some of the, I think the LSAT, the MCAT, a lot of these very advanced tests are also adaptive. It means that they get the questions get harder as they do better. And that leads to a lot of questions that parents have about the scoring as well. And to be honest with you, it's an algorithm, and maybe Chris or Byron understands better how that works. But a lot of parents say, okay, well, if they are moved into the harder module and they're actually doing more rigorous problems, how do they score that? That's a question. And it's part of the algorithm of how they've created this adaptive test. But that's what adaptive means.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. It kind of leads to a follow-up question for Byron and Chris. So real quick, how do we interpret and read those initial results, both from reading and writing standpoint, the evidence-based reading and writing, and then the math versus the total? So Chris and Byron, to the two of you, what do you think and how do you go about interpreting those initial results when you see them?
Well, initially, and I'll let Chris speak to this after me here, but the score is relative to the goal, right? So, I mean, a 1300 doesn't mean the same to everybody. It really depends on what that goal is for that student. So we want to have good data. We want to have that score. We want to be able to know what it means in terms of where we're going with that. So I think that would be the most important thing that we would want to look at. And at some point, when I'm looking for super scores come into play here too, and we can talk more about that another time. But Chris, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, thank you, Byron. In fact, it's sometimes interesting. One of the first questions I'll receive from someone who I know has listened to the court of public opinion, but hasn't really done a lot of research into it, is the very first question.
Oh, no.
I have Chris glitching.
How many perfect scores has your company? It's usually involved with the student knowing what their score goal is, as Byron just said. What goal do you need to get into your target colleges and your stretch or reach colleges? So number one, start with that goal. Also, one thing, Jessica mentioned the adaptability, the adaptive nature of the test. That's very important to understand. With the SAT, it's what's called modularly adaptive. So it's really just from module 1 to module 2. Within the module itself, you're not served up increasingly difficult or changing. It's just how well you do on module 1 for the math and for the English that says which module you'll get into in the end. And I wanted to point out quickly there's a lot of questions that we get about that is how do we game the first module so we get into the second one? It's really the 3 key things, the subject matter, the test taking skills, and one's understanding on pacing and timing that apply to the entire test, not just module 1. So that's why it's important to have that upper level goal and the understanding of really how the test operates.
No, I love that. So speaking of some of the tests and kind of getting into a little bit more, practice tests are really critical to place the student in a new environment that they're testing in, which is essentially to get them comfortable. And I think as test prep services, we see a lot of parents come in and they're asking us questions about the digital SAT. And oftentimes the parents are the ones that are uncomfortable because they've never had to do it, where kids are used to being online. However, taking a critical test like the DSAT online now is still very intimidating to some of these students. So when it comes to practice tests, traditionally you could get the results of the test taken and you can see where the student was strong or had room for opportunity. We used to be able to do that. That doesn't happen anymore. So question to the group, how do we use the new practice tests, no matter what platform you're on, but how do we use the new practice tests to gain insights to some of the strengths and opportunities of the students that we are preparing for that DSAT? So, back out to the group.
Well, I'd start off by saying that practice tests are very, very important, in the progression of a student. I mean, everybody, or most of us, when we're taking a standardized test, there's lots of pressure and there's room for lots of anxiety to creep in and affect those outcomes. So what we're trying to do when we're giving the students those practice tests, and we encourage them, if they're going to be a part of a test prep plan, that they have that experience, every 3 or 4 weeks at least, right? So we want them to get familiar with and comfortable with what it is to take a standardized test. Now, it's not perfect, but it is creating enough of that similarities and likenesses to a live standard test that they can build their comfort level. They can, and it's just by having that familiarity. So what we don't want them to do is go into a test, their live test day, cold turkey, right? Because that's just too much anxiety, stress, and so forth. But the idea of those multiple tests gives them that exposure, that familiarity. They can start getting comfortable and sensing and understanding the nuances, which is going to impact, the test taking strategies. And Chris talked about the importance of pacing as well. So those would be my initial comments on this. You guys feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I would say, that's part of our test prep program is practice tests. For in my business, I don't want to see a student until we have a baseline practice test. We have to know where they're at, right? And the PSAT, this is a good point that I tell parents because they don't realize that. The PSAT is not an SAT practice test. It's a PSAT, which is easier, and it's scored differently. It's scored out of 15, 20. So we need them to take a practice test. And the practice tests are right now digitally on a portal. No matter how, we have different ways of doing that on our portals within our company, but they have to take it on a portal because they have to get used to taking it on a digital platform. And a lot of students have never taken a test on a digital platform. So when we go in and we get the scores, we can log in and as tutors and as our company and really see what they got right and what they got wrong, and go over in detail the questions they got wrong, and really see a pattern of where are their gaps and where are their strengths.
it really sums it up. You know, we have a detailed analysis in those practice tests that allow for us to make recommendations, which kind of leads me to a follow-up question, which is for you, Chris. Is it better to focus on weaker areas to strengthen them, or focus on stronger areas which might not have as much headroom to grow or increase? What are your thoughts there, Chris?
Sort of the proverbial Yogi Berra question, right? When you see a fork in the road, take, right? Yes, especially if it has chocolate ice cream on it. That's why a test is so important. I mean, kind of going back up to the top again, is it's very important to understand where might the student have difficulties. And I've always said, as I alluded to earlier, good test prep's like a three-legged stool. Subject matter, the test taking strategies, and the pacing and timing. All three of those have to be relatively balanced, just like the legs of a stool. Otherwise, you've got a wobbly stool and you'll fall over. So you want to understand what is the cause of my not hitting my target score or doing as well as I believe I should? Is it the underlying subject matter? Is it the strategies, or is it more the pacing and timing? It's always a little bit of the three, but it'll be a different blend for all, for every student. So you want to go back and take a look at the categories of questions as well. Am I strong on geometry but weak on trig? Am I strong on sentence completion, weak on inference type questions? That's what a good practice test report will tell you, not just the number. Who cares about the number in the end? Because that you have to get under the hood, another cliche, to be able to figure out exactly what needs the repair. So that's what the combination of a solid test report and an experienced tutor can really help make happen with the student's participation.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Chris, so much. Additional follow-up. Byron, I'm going to throw it over to you as a tutor and a student, right? You take it from either perspective. How do you talk to your tutors, or how do you talk to students or families on how they divide their time and energy to address the stronger or weaker subjects or topics for each section?
Well, that's going to be a different kind of a answer, for the different scenarios that are going to come up. But I think it begins with, getting a good understanding of what the data is telling us, right? And, and one of the things that Tutor Doctors, one of the tools that we use is our cognitive skills assessment, right? And that is going to identify what particular cognitive strengths or weaknesses they have. So if someone is struggling more with verbal type of content, we can be more efficient in addressing that with specific strategies that will support those types of skills. And likewise, if they're more of a visual learner. So I love the fact that we have this tool. It's very unique, and that's going to drive that conversation on how we can help them most efficiently in terms of where we're going to focus our time and what efforts.
Yeah, I agree. Just as a quick aside, I think our cognitive assessment is really aided both in the SAT preparation, ACT prep, and even just our private clients in general. The interpretation of those results and the conversations that ensue with our parents really.
One thing to add with that, Jeff, as well, is that's our mind print assessment, which is distinct from our actual practice tests themselves.
Right.
And of course, viewers today can reach out to their local Tutor Doctor office. We'll have that contact information at the end of the message, as well as even search on our website. But two different tools that we have that we really think set the student up for their best chance at their target score.
Yeah, and it sounds like practice tests are more and more important now than they've even ever been, considering the data that we can pull, the interpretation of those results, looking at certain sections, determining, the strengths and the weaknesses. And it really helps us with our plan of attack for improvement with the students. So to get a little bit more granular, if I have a topical area, Jess, I'll give this one to you. If you have a topical area which doesn't seem to improve much after 2 or 3 practice tests, should I give up on it and focus elsewhere, or how should we address this? Both, how do you approach the parents, which we'll get into a little later today, but as a student, like how do we get our tutors to get the student to believe in themselves a little more on this?
Well, so this reminds me of something that just happened yesterday, actually. We had a student, Alex, and we were working with him toward his first test, which was in October. He came out with his first SAT score, which I believe was like a 1280 or something like that. And then he said to his mom, well, I'm going to self-study. I want to take it again, but I'm going to self-study. So in our platform that we have, they have access to their practice tests for 1 year. And I went in and I saw that he's been working on his test, but he's taking the same test over and over again. So he took the same test 3 times on his own, and I could see that his scores were sort of plateauing. This is without a tutor. So I reached out to his mom and I said, Mom, I see that Alex is working hard. I give him a lot of credit for that, but he's plateauing. He's kind of at a point where if he only got 1 or 2 or 3 or more questions correct, he could get himself up into the 1400s, because he was at averaging out like a 1350, 1380. I said he could get himself, but he needs help. He needs help to really identify which questions is he still getting wrong. Because even if he answers a couple more correct, that'll bring him up. But he's not able to do that independently. And the mom said, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I had no idea, because she didn't know. Let me talk to him and see even if we do a couple more sessions to really hone in and identify what's going on and which questions is he missing. That is so important. And that's what we can do.
An advantage of having a tutor with a tutoring program that's been custom designed for you is to help you to move beyond what you yourself are individually capable of. That's why we do what we do.
Exactly. And I said to Mom, he's working hard. We can see that. And I understand that he wants to do it on his own, but he's there. We can get him a little bit higher. And I know he wants to get up into that 1400s. Yep. And he is working. He can work smarter with a tutor and really hone in and identify.
And if I can jump in real quickly, that's very true. Address the elephant in the room, or the elephant on the internet, AI. AI is not a great test prep tool in and of itself, just because the ACT and the SAT share the letter A. That's really about the only similarity. You really need to have that external coach who's observing, who's monitoring, who's managing what is going on and providing insights. Just like nobody's going to go out and become a world-class golfer watching YouTube videos or something of that nature, right? You need to have that external coach. And that's really the other element that we bring into it. Jessica talked about that, so did Byron. It's really important to not only have the tests, not only have a curriculum, but to have that proper coaching. And the SAT and the ACT are far different than most tests that kids will be taking in school today. And they almost serve as a capstone of a student's education up to now. And it's really a key factor in college admissions and merit-based scholarships. So it's super important that people treat it as important as it really is. And we can't really overemphasize that.
Yeah, I agree. And oftentimes, in Jessica, in your case, parents sometimes don't even know what's going on. As much as they were involved in the first part, then they kind of lose focus, especially with the length of time it takes to truly prep the correct way. But we also get calls late in the game where it's like, well, what's going on? Do we have enough time? Well, in the case that you're speaking about, Jessica, when is the next official exam? And did we catch it in time? And what can we do to fix it? And with all the different strategies that we have, all the different data that we pull, all the different info that we have, the practice tests, the fact that our tutors have access to so much, we can help guide those parents and those students when they, in fact, go a little off the beaten path and it's not working out the way they wanted, and we kind of have to reel them back in. So it's nice that our services are able to do that. So let's shift focus into what we can do with the data and information as the educational and test prep professionals. Using the data at hand, how do you prepare for your first or second discussion with a family post a practice test or knowing the previous SAT score, right? So you have both, and in most cases, you've spoken to them, they've heard about us, they talk to us, they take a practice test, we know what their old SAT score was. After all, we're about test prep services. So how do you go about preparing for that conversation after you get those tests back? Any thoughts on that from the panel? I know it's a large question, but I think it's an important. Go ahead, Jess.
I am very upfront and honest. I usually pull it up on the screen and show them, what the scores are. And especially if it's their first test, let's go over it. But we have to have what Byron was saying, the conversation of, well, what are your college goals? What are you looking at here? Where do you want to go? Have you even started to identify college choices? And everybody from up my area, they all want to go down south. If you want to go to Florida, you need to have a test score. So if a student comes in and I got somebody the other day at an 850, that's a lot of work that they're going to need to do to get their score into even the national average, which is like a 1020. That's a lot of work. Now, when I see a score like an 820, many times I say to the student, come on, Bobby, did you really try? Be honest with me. Or did you just get through it and say, I'm just going to do this? You have to be honest with yourself as a student, because that is not when I see a score like that, that is not a realistic evaluation of where the student is at. And many times they say, so what's your GPA? Oh, I'm like a 3.7. Well, does this 850 represent who you are as a student? Come on. Right. If you want to go to Florida, you gotta step it up.
Byron, anything to add to that?
Yeah, having that baseline data, having that goal, those are the fundamental pieces, right? So what we need to do is, hey, let's work backwards from the ultimate goal. And that's the job of our tutor, our test prep professionals. Hey, what are the pieces that we need to accomplish? What are the objectives on a monthly, weekly scale, timetable of what we actually need to accomplish? That's the job of our test prep experts, right? So they build a tutoring test prep plan that is going to help get them from where they are today to where they want to be in 3 months or 6 months from now, whatever it might be. So when they get together, the tutor is going to manage their program so that they're getting a regular regimen of worksheets, of practice tests, of quizzes, of everything that need to get moving on a consistent basis towards that goal. So it's not, here's our box plan of what it looks like to become, 1500, get a 1500 on your SAT. No, that's not what we do. It's a very customized approach on a week by week basis to get them from where they are today to where they want to be.
Yeah, agreed. And we're talking about very, very critically emotional times in some of these students' lives, right? And getting test scores back, whether they're good or bad, is all in the eye of the beholder. But it's still an emotional time for those kids and families. So, Chris, this one's for you. So how do you go about removing the emotion from the conversation from our perspective? Because removing emotion is necessary from our standpoint, because they're so emotional and invested in their own family and students and kids. And so how do you go about that? I think it's really critical that we take that very seriously.
Well, I very much appreciate that question. I have 3 kids of my own that have gone through SAT. And so, yeah, we saw a lot of that. I think the operative word, not just for my kids, but everyone else's, is probably more reduce than remove. More than just semantics. It really is a situation of going back to that plan. Over and over, we've tried to emphasize plan, right, at the outset of this discussion and all the way through. So when things are going great, hey, don't veer from the plan. Otherwise, we get overly complacent. If things aren't going well, then we just abandon the plan. No, we stay on plan. Trust your tutor. Trust your tutor doctor.
I think you switched again, and that's okay.
Right. Through this with hundreds, if not in the plan, we need to do so.
Great.
If you can hear me, okay.
Yeah, we got you. Yeah, all set.
I was going to mention timing, the schedule, summer. One way to reduce or remove the anxiety is find the best time to do your test preparation. Right. And many parents have found that summer after the 10th grade is the best time to do it, because you don't have most students don't have any other demands. It's a little tougher during the school year, but if you've already finished the 10th grade and you finished the grade level math and English reasonably strong, then time is not on your side. You want to start that preparation as soon as you possibly can, working around extracurriculars and everything else. So that's the other key way to remove or reduce the amount of stress involved with test prep.
Yes, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, one of the questions to have test prep over the summer as a rising junior is what math class what level of math have you taken already? You know, if the student has not taken Algebra 2, they're not ready. So that's a key determining factor that I speak to a lot of the parents about, is that if you're rising juniors going into pre-calc, you're ready. If you're not ready. You're not ready in the summer before junior year. So, you know, let's make a plan. Let's plan it out based on their junior year, and when does it make a lot of sense to start? So, you know, you have those kids lined up for, maybe you start right around winter break for a spring test. So you make a plan in advance. So at least the parent, it eases the anxiety for the parent, and it eases the anxiety for the student, because they have something that they know when they're looking forward to starting their plan.
Okay. That's a great call. And I want to be conscious for the timing for our viewers. So talking about plans, let's just jump into that a little bit. So switching gears to the final piece of the puzzle, right? We have data. We interpret that data. We have gathered all types of information, additional information, things we've observed, conversations we've had. Now, how do we help the families and the students turn all of this into action, right? Byron, you touched on this right before, so let's double tap on it a little bit. Often it's really important to work backwards, is what you said. And oftentimes that comes from, let's start with a list of schools that you really want, and then let's back our way into our plan. So how do we help families stay on track for their goals that they've set out for ultimately, what the ultimate goal is, we get a good grade to go to the school we want. So how do we keep them on track for that goal?
I think what's really, really important is that families understand is that we are not creating that goal for them. It's their goal. They've done their homework. They're buying into what it is they want to accomplish. What we're doing is we're filling in with the pieces that it's going to take to help them get there. And so having the data that we talked about, identifying where their strengths and weaknesses are, and making sure that we're capitalizing on the strengths that they have, and at the same time making sure that we're also filling in the gaps so that we can make up and have the highest impact on the outcomes that they're looking for. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. In the affirmation head bobbing I was doing a few minutes ago, I was actually having flashbacks to a number of my students who have done it the right way, and just thinking, oh yeah, and you were helping affirm that. Yeah, bottom line is, again, the plan. There are very few students today that are really one and done when it comes to taking the test itself, especially in this era of super scoring. A lot of parents say, oh, we just want to be done with it once. I don't want my child to have to suffer through multiple. Well, I saw a stat the other day, I think it was last week. The average now is closer to 3 attempts on the SAT. And it's actually pushing even more so now with ACT, because it's got 4 sections, and everybody's like, hey, I can take it 3 times. And sure, it doesn't matter how many times. What you really need to do, again, what is your target score? And then if you take that first official test, and if there's a narrow gap, maybe you take it once more. If there's a moderate gap, then you might need to take it a couple of more times, but with the right plan.
I want to add one thing to that. There are some schools, Georgetown, Ivies, they don't want to see that you're taking it. They don't want to see you're taking it too many times. They want to see that you're taking it maybe twice max, some of these very, very high level competitive schools. So that's part of the plan. What schools are we targeting here so we can incorporate that into the plan?
And last question here before I do some closing remarks and we close up our session of admitted advice on college admissions and testing. It's tough. When is the right time to suggest an adjustment in the original plan? Should you go with the ACT? How would college admissions view certain efforts, as Jess just touched upon? How would they view the score if you've taken it 3 or 4 times? So as professionals, when do you think it's appropriate, and how do you go about, quickly addressing that a change in plan might need to take place?
Byron, you want to go?
Well,
Might be a whole session.
yeah, there's a lot of issues right there. There's so many things there, right? I mean, personally, when it comes to, taking a test multiple times or taking the SAT and the ACT, those are all are the questions that we're asking in the initial consultation when we're educating the client about what the consequences of those choices are, right? So that becomes a part of the plan. So if you have a good test prep program, they're going to be having those types of conversations with you. That's not going to happen in a box store solution. It just will not happen, right? So that's the way I would start off by answering that question. And I mean, generally speaking, however, I would not discourage somebody from taking the test multiple times because there's definite advantages to doing it. But it's not a blanket answer because there are particular situations where that might not be the ideal thing to do. So it's the conversation you want to have with a test prep professional that will help you think about the things you haven't thought of, help you ask the questions that you haven't considered before so that you can come up with the right answers and the right plan to get to the goal that you want.
And quickly regarding score reports, that's why many times we recommend the student take an SAT, take an ACT, both practice tests at the beginning. So we can take a look at, what patterns do we see that are similar and different? Also, just what's the feel of the test, especially since the tests are changing, which is the topic of another video that is on our channel. Please view it. As these tests are changing, the feel is becoming different. So it really is important for students to take an SAT, take an ACT. We compare them, and then we can make our best recommendation of which one test to follow. And then we do see some students who at the end, they feel they've topped out or the parent will push them, well, hey, try the other one. We don't want them, stopping midway and then moving to the other test. That is terrible advice and is out there. So we recommend pick one, take it to the duration, and then reassess options at the end.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Thanks, everybody. So thanks to our panelists for sharing your insights today. And so all the important discussions on the digital SAT and score interpretation. As we've explored, understanding DSAT results goes far beyond just a final score. It's about using that data to create a meaningful and strategic plan, one that helps students maximize their strengths, addresses the areas for growth, and ultimately they're more comfortable in their test-taking abilities. So the shift to an adaptive digital format has changed how we prepare, how we analyze results, and how we guide families through this journey. But one thing remains the same, that preparation does matter. Thoughtful practice, informed strategy, and clear communication with students and families are the key to navigating these the new landscape and doing it successfully. As educational professionals, guys, our role is to not just help students earn a strong score, but to equip them with the skills and strategies that will serve them well beyond that. So again, thank you all for being a part of today's discussion. Let's keep pushing forward to help these students achieve their goals. So awesome. Thanks, everybody.